Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the course of Survey of Major English-Speaking Countries. Today, we're going to learn Chapter 6, The Literature of Great Britain. This lecture is about Lesson C, Romanticism in British Literature. In British history, 18th century English literature is marked by a rather large shift from the mood and the tone of the 17th century literature. Intellectual activity sets the 18th century apart. It was the age of wit, when great thinkers and writers argued. It was an age of skepticism, when thinking men questioned all facts and beliefs. The 18th century had been a time of enlightenment, of a belief in reason, tradition, society, and science. Then, in the words of one critic, the French Revolution and Napoleon made a clear sweep. After them, it was no longer possible to think, act, or write as if the old forms still had life. Out of the smoke of the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution emerged a new approach to writing characterized by emotion over reason. In this Romantic age, the individual person was valued over society. Imagination was valued over logic, and the natural world was valued over the artificial. Romantics found inspiration in nature, folk art, the past, and their own passions. The Romantic period was one of the major social changes in England. Due to depopulation of the countryside and a rapid development of overcrowded industrial cities that took place roughly between 1798 and 1832. The movement of so many people in England was the result of two forces. The first is the agricultural revolution, which involved enclosure movements that drove workers and their families off the land. And the second is the Industrial Revolution, which provided them employment in the factories and mills, operated by machines driven by steam power. Indeed, Romanticism may be seen in part as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, though it was also a revolt against aristocratic social and political norms of the Age of Enlightenment, as well as a reaction against the scientific rationalization of nature. The French Revolution was an especially important influence on political thinking of many notable Romantic figures at this time as well. In England, the Romantic poets were at the very heart of this movement. They were inspired by a desire for liberty, and they denounced the exploitation of the poor. There was an emphasis on the importance of an individual, a conviction that a people should follow ideals rather than imposed conventions and rules. The Romantics abandoned the rationalism and the order associated with preceding Enlightenment era, stressing the importance of expressing authentic personal feelings. They had a real sense of responsibility to their fellow men. They felt it was their duty to use their poetry to inform and inspire others, and to change society. When reference is made to Romantic poetry, the poets who generally spring to mind are William Blake, 1757 to 1827, William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, 1772 to 1834. George Gordon, 6th Lord Byron, 1788 to 1824. Percy Bysshe Shelley, 1792 to 1822. And John Keats, 1795 to 1821. These writers had an intuitive feeling that they were chosen to guide others through the period of changes. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's sense brought in by the new historical moment was expressed in their lyrical ballads, which revolutionized the theory and the practice of poetry. William Wordsworth influentially located the source of a poem not in outer nature, but in the psychology and emotion of the individual poet. In keeping with the view that poetry emphasizes the poet's feelings, the lyric became a major romantic form. It was held that the act of composition must be spontaneous, arising from impulse and free from rules. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge left the city for the Lake District. In their works, there is a kind of individualism that refuses every kind of moral convention and the belief that nature is divine and has a soul. William Wordsworth's poems are about country scenes and country people. Representatives of his work are the long autobiographic poem, The Prelude, and such shorter poems as I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, also called Daffodils. William Wordsworth's poetry varies widely. Some is written in plain language, and in other poems, the style is complex. In his poems, the expression of personal feelings, energy, and passion is so vivid and evident, in which nature is not only peaceful and meditative, but also stormy and too big for man. In the short poem, My Heart Leaps Up, the simple nine-line poem describes how the poet is filled with joy when he sees a rainbow, and how he hopes he will always keep that sense of enchantment with the natural world. The poem contains Wordsworth's famous declaration, "The child is father of the man," highlighting how important childhood experience was to the Romantics in helping to shape the human beings they became in adult life. Three men brought the British Romantic movement to its height. The first is George Gordon, Lord Byron, traveled widely in Europe. Part of the time an exile because of his scandals related to his marriage. At the age of 36, he died of a fever in Greece, while he had gone as a volunteer to fight for Greek independence. His large body of work includes the partly autobiographical Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. The poem is based on Byron's European travels and describes exotic landscapes and people, along with contemporary military and political events, presenting them from the viewpoint of Childe Harold. Harold is a typical Byronic hero, tormented by guilt. He is bitter, cynical, and proud. Because of these feelings, He is isolated from other people, cut off by the intensity of his feelings and suffering. He wanders in search of some release, but never finds it. The dark, rebellious, Byronic hero, a solitary wanderer, seemed to represent a generation. The figure became a kind of role model for youngsters. Men regarded him as cool, and women found him attractive. His work, Dongwon, owns this title and parts of his story to the old legend of the great lover. Byron retells the story in the form of the satire. The second is Percy Bysshe Shelley, whose writing has a wide range. The lovely musical quality of his work appears in the fine verse of Ode to the West Wind. In this poem, the poet starts by identifying himself with the wind. He wants to have the same power and the same liberty. As such, it can be considered a political poem. The West Wind is the wind from America, from the Revolution. The romantic world is a dynamic world of changes. What creates the changes are the elemental forces as storm, thunders. Unfortunately, a month before his 30th birthday, Shelley drowned while sailing in the Mediterranean. His ashes lie in the same Roman cemetery where John Keats is buried. The third man is John Keats, who came from a humble origin. His father kept a stable. It is fortunate that Keats' genius showed itself early, since he died of a disease in Rome at the age of 25. Keats was superb at pictorial poetry, painting a picture with words. His art is nowhere greater than in the two poems, Ode on a Grecian urn and Ode to a Nightingale. The most notable feature of the poetry of the time is the new role of individual thoughts and personal feelings. While the main trend of the 18th century poetry had been to praise the general, to see the poet as the spokesman of society, addressing a cultivated audience and a conveying of truth. The Romantics found the source of poetry in the particular, unique experience. The early poet, William Blake, was seen as an individual distinguished from his fellows by the intensity of his perceptions, taking as his basic subject matter the working of his own mind. Poetry was regarded as conveying its own truth, personal feeling, and individual thoughts. Romantic poets cultivated individualism, worship the natural world, idealism, physical and emotional passion, and an interest in the mystery and the supernatural. Romantics set themselves in opposition to the order and the reason of classical and neoclassical artistic concepts to embrace freedom and a revolution in their art and politics. For the Romantics, poetry was believed to be the highest form of literature, and the Romantic literature emphasized the dream or the inner world of the individual. The use of visionary, fantastic images were prevalent. Romantic literature emphasized the individual self and the value of the individual experience. Feeling and emotions were viewed as superior to logic and analysis. In the end, let's listen to and appreciate a beautiful poem from John Keats, Ode to a Nightingale.
Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains 1 minute past, and lethe-wards had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beech and green and shadows numberless, sing'st of summer and full-throated ease. Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep-delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and Provençal song, and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou amongst the leaves hast never known. The weariness, the fever and the fret here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy, through the dull brain perplexes and retards. Already with thee. Tender is the night, and haply the queen moon is on her throne, clustered round by all her starry fays. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in the leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk-rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever it seems rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The same that oft times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas, in fairylands forlorn. Forlorn! The very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu! The fancy cannot cheat so well as she is fain to do, deceiving elf. Adieu! Adieu! Thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside. And now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music,